expand a little bit more on the Music Modernization Act for those that aren't familiar with it, and
Sure.
kind of also what role did you play kind of in helping that become reality?
Absolutely. So since 2005, people have been talking about problems with the mechanical license. And if you don't know, and I had a big pause earlier, I said, oh, well, if you have a copyright, you have the exclusive rights to license something. Yeah, well, that's not true in a few cases. There are these things called statutory licenses. And what you might gather from their name is it's a license that is by statute, by operation of law, not a direct license. And these date back to 1909, like back in the days of player pianos, where what had happened was back in the day, this one player piano company bought up all the rights to player pianos, not knowing if there was actually a right in that type of medium for musical works. And so the Congress said, well, we don't like what you're doing. We think that that's an antitrust problem. One company shouldn't be buying up all these rights. So we're going to make it clear that, musical work copyright owners do have a right in copyright, but we're going to make it subject to a license where for every reproduction, right, every piano roll that you make, you can't stop other companies from making those reproductions if the company fills out some forms and such, reports on how many copies they make, and pays 2 cents a copy. So fast forward, 100 years in the future, the world has changed, and while like CDs and vinyl records are still getting, a few pennies for each reproduction, and nobody could stop people from reproducing the musical work, now we have digital interactive streaming and digital downloads. And so, companies like Spotify, because they're making a reproduction, it's a different type of reproduction, but it's still a reproduction of the musical work. The powers that be said, well, they are going to have to pay not only a performance royalty for the stream, but they're also going to have to pay for reproducing and distributing the musical work. And so, that rule, we still use the old statutory license to cover that rule. However, the old license had some nuances to it. One was, to get a statutory license, you had to, file those forms on the copyright owner. But if the copyright owner was not located in the Copyright Office's records, you filed the forms with the Copyright Office, but then you didn't pay any money to the copyright owner. And so, Spotify would have to, get direct licenses. And I just use Spotify as an example, but they're kind of the
Sure.
most well-known interactive service. And then, file these forms for what they thought, they couldn't find at the office. And they would do it again and again and again. And, sometimes those copyright owners were in their office's records, so that didn't actually apply. And sometimes they still missed licenses, and it was just really not working for them. On the other side, if a copyright owner just didn't happen to record their musical work in the office, they weren't due any royalties, and they didn't like that either. So that was one piece of the legislation. There were other pieces that might not need to get into, but and starting in 2005, people were talking about like, hey, how do we solve this? Should we have a blanket license? Who should run it? What should it look like? Who should pay for it? And ultimately, in 2018, we finally got a bill passed called the Music Modernization Act. And it said that we're going to create a new collective. The government's going to designate it. So that was one of the things we did. They're going to take all the money and all of the reports from the digital services, bring them together, match the musical works to the sound recordings, because interestingly, they usually just report on sound recording uses, like the label uses, and then the musical work publisher information comes later, and then they have to match them. And we're going to make that collective collect all the money and pay it out to the copyright owners, either the publishers or the songwriters. And so they have this huge database now, something that they've been trying to pull together for years, this database of who owns the musical works, either a publisher or songwriter or a combination. And that includes metadata, because metadata is super important to get paid. And what I did from the office was I, helped Congress in adjusting the bill. Like, we got a complete bill, but it needed some edits, so we helped them do that. And then when Congress said, okay, we want to leave to the Copyright Office things like who, with the digital services, what information do they need to report to this new collective to get paid? Is it this metadata, that metadata, something else? How often do they need to do it? In what form does it need to be delivered? Rules about confidentiality, and everything in between. So we spent 2 years trying to figure out all those things that Congress left for us. And now the new collective is called the Mechanical Licensing Collective. They've by now paid out $1 billion in the last couple of years on the mechanical side, which is great because that's money going to songwriters and publishers, and lifting up that middle class. And we are continually getting, both services, songwriters, and publishers in the Mechanical Licensing Collective itself asking us to make tweaks to the regulations because sometimes they forgot things or it wasn't working as maybe they intended, or there's some pieces of the law that they didn't think were clear. And they said, look, Copyright Office, this is your job to make that decision. Let us know what the answer is. So, a lot of that stuff I do, and it's fun, but it's also like really, really nerdy. So I like talking to real people too.